The Federal High Court sitting in Abuja on Wednesday declared null and void the provisions of the Nigeria Broadcasting Code, which authorizes the National Broadcasting Commission to impose fines on broadcast stations for alleged breaches of the code. The ruling handed down by Justice Rita Ofili Ajimogobia was on a suit instituted by Media Rights Agenda against the NBC following the Commission's imposition of fines on a television station and 3 paid TV platforms in 2022 for allegedly undermining Nigeria's national security by broadcasting documentaries on banditry. Lanre Arogundade is Director, International Press Center, and a one-time chairman of the Lagos State Chapel of the Nigeria Union of Journalists, and he joins us now to take a closer look at this development. Many thanks for being here on Newsday. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can we guess that you're pleased with this development?
Oh yes, very, very happy about it. And we must start by thanking the Media Rights Agenda for acting on behalf of the media community in Nigeria, particularly the broadcast media. All along, we've maintained that what the NBC normally do each time they claim that a broadcast station has breached the code is against the basic tenets of the rule of law, in the sense that it's more or less like the DG or whoever in that office will decide that you've committed an offense, and sometimes they won't even wait for your own response before they go ahead to impose hefty fines, which could be very, very damaging to the economic interests of the broadcast media, which means that most of the time they act as the accuser, the prosecutor or the investigator, and the judge in their own case. And that is clearly not acceptable. So we're happy that a court of law has put a judicial stamp on the position we've held all along, that this attitude of NBC is actually contrary to the principles of media independence and press freedom. A regulatory body is supposed to act in such a way that they also protect the economic interests of the broadcast stations. And when you just impose fines, you are not even looking at their survival. Now, this is not about saying that we should break the code as media, but what we're saying is that at every point in time, there should be room for a broadcast medium to state its case against any allegation.
All right, then. So when we look at this ruling, and the courts, of course, saying that the NBC exceeded its powers by imposing these fines on broadcast stations and TV platforms, what implications do you see this ruling having on the regulatory authority of the NBC and its ability to, of course, enforce these fines? And then also, do you think that this in itself gives, let's say, media platforms the willingness to be able to cover more sensitive topics and more investigative topics in itself?
Well, I think with this ruling, the broadcast media in Nigeria can know that NBC can no longer just breathe on their neck anyhow. Much as we say, steep to professionalism, we never like the fact that you were never too sure that a sword of Damocles was dangling on your head anytime you're having a live program, you're having live conversation. So that itself is not right. And what we've told NBC all along, and the kind of reforms we have sought, is that, okay, let me put it this way. NBC has a council. That council can make something like an appellate court within the NBC itself. So if you are accused of a very grievous offense that may lead to fine or revocation of license or whatever, you can then put it in the letter that, well, you have a right to appeal this to the council, and then the council can look at it. But what the court is also saying is that a regulatory body cannot exercise judicial functions. And this is not the first case of its type. Yes. I remember when they had a public hearing, we also cited another case. It didn't affect the media, where another regulatory body took punitive measures against an organization. And the court held that, look, it was wrong. You don't have that kind of power. So what would expect the NBC to do now is to go back to the usual drawing board, have more conversations with stakeholders in the media industry on how it could streamline its processes We also have the NBC code. And what we've also told them is that the NBC code itself cannot act in violation of, the Constitution. And it has to be a product of, the consultations with stakeholders, in the industry. So the judgment itself is not a license for the media to act anyhow.
Of course.
But at the same time, it doesn't mean now that NBC no longer has, regulatory functions. There are ways in which you can regulate without being punitive. You could regulate through dialogue. You could regulate, through, consultations. There are many, ways that a broadcast regulatory body can regulate the industry, but not in a way that you consider yourself to a body that, instills fears in the minds, of, broadcasters. Remember one of the cases that came up recently involved another, a sister television station where, a host had a guest. And, the guest, this was a live program. I'm here now. You are not in a position to know what I'm going to say in the next second.
Yes.
So if I say anything that, seems volatile, somebody cannot just come and grab you and say, you are responsible. And in that particular instance, there was even an attempt, to make some corrections, but without any form of listening to the other side whatsoever. NBC just went ahead and imposed that fine. So it is this arbitrariness that we've always complained against. And now that we've had this court ruling, my honest advice to NBC would be that, not that we're afraid or maybe MRA is afraid, I think it would be in the enlightened interest of NBC not to, appeal, this judgment, but to really go back and look at its procedures, look at best practices in other places so that they can regulate in such a way that we will not feel that they're actually strangulating the broadcast media.
The media.
I'm going to stir the pot a little bit because before we had you, we had Mr. Shobwale who was saying that they will appeal. It doesn't end there. It always ends at this.
I saw him when I was coming in and then, was that what Mr. Abula was
I actually
saying?
wish we had both of you now, but he said they will appeal. So in the event that they appeal this judgment, are you prepared for that?
Well, MRA went to court, but we are very close to MRA. The executive director of MRA is actually the chair of the Board of International Press Center. I'm sure that MRA will be prepared. And if the judicial process allows, other interest parties may even join this case and become what they call them, Miss Korea or something like that. This is a case of very, very high interest to the media industry. And like I said, MRA is just speaking for the entire media industry. They're speaking for the Nigerian Guild of Editors. They're speaking for Nigerian Union of Journalists. They're speaking for the Broadcasters Organization of Nigeria, all of whom have repeatedly said that NBC needs to recheck its procedures. So for me, I would be surprised if they go on appeal. Well, but it's
within their right.
It's within their right to do so, and I'm sure their lawyers too may feel that we can't just be defeated like this. And we want to be optimistic. We are not trying to prejudice the mind of the judiciary, but we'll be optimistic that the judiciary will err on the side of rule of law, as they have done in this particular instance.
Do you anticipate any legislative or policy changes in response to this ruling, either to redefine the powers of the NBC or to enhance protections for media freedom in Nigeria?
That cannot be ruled out. Even as we speak, in the 9th National Assembly, there was a bill to amend the act establishing the National Broadcasting Commission. Just as we had another one to amend the act establishing the Nigerian Press Council. We're not too sure whether this 10th Assembly would not revisit that particular bill. Again, that bill, in fact, gave more draconian powers to the two regulatory bodies. NPC, for example, was going to be empowered to withdraw the licenses of newspapers and so on and so forth. For those who may be anti-press freedom, they may want to use the path of legislation to come through the back door, to do the kind of things that the judiciary has not said. But the good thing is that any law, too, can always be tested in court. So even if they go by way of this amendment and they decide to have a bill or an act that does not meet the basic standards of a rule of law when it comes to media practice, you can be sure that it would also be challenged. So it cannot be ruled out that we may have such a legislation. But we've been to the National Assembly to state our objection. We've had dialogue with them, and I'm happy that when we went there the other time, that is the 9th National Assembly, when the Committee on Information had a public hearing, some members of the committee actually stated their agreement with us that before you could impose safety fine or even shut down a broadcast station, you have to go to court to obtain the leave of court. And one of the members actually stood up and said there was nothing wrong with that, because what the NBC, what the amendment was saying was that you could be shut down, but out there you can then go to court after 30 days. So you will have been off air for 30 days before you can even go to court. And we said we don't know any jurisdiction in the world where that kind of thing, applies. So I'm hopeful that even if we go back now by way of this amendment, they will be willing, to listen to us, to dialogue with us, so that we can have, an amendment. The case is not against regulation. The case is not against professionalism in the media. We need to uphold, ethical standards as much as possible. In terms of, at a time like this when volatile things are happening in our country, banditry, kidnapping, as broadcasters, we have a duty, presenters, producers like you, moderators of programs, have a duty to ensure that people who speak on your platforms are conflict sensitive. They don't insult people, they don't engage in hate speech. But where we hear or we are perceived to have heard, what we're saying is that deal with us on the basis of the rule of law. It's as simple as that. And I hope Mr. Chubowale will agree with me on this point.
We'll ask him.
So that when he comes tomorrow, he will have changed his mind and said, okay, NBC, don't appeal at all.
Let's see. We'll definitely forward that to him. But I'd like to know when it comes, this is obviously a step in the right direction.
Yes,
what further steps would you like to see for Nigeria to achieve that press freedom that you probably dream of in the next, let's say, 5 years?
What further steps? We would like to see an amendment in the NBC Act, first, that would give the National Assembly a say in the constitution of the council. We're worried that when it comes to media regulatory bodies, the National Assembly virtually don't play any role, despite the fact that Section 88 of the Constitution gives them oversight powers. All other regulatory bodies, the president would nominate the chairman of the council, their board, and then it will now be subject to the confirmation of the National Assembly. If you do that, at least we would have the opportunity. So if somebody who is against press freedom or has acted against media interests is going to become the chair of the council or the board of the press council or the NBC, we will be in a position to go there and say, oh no, we are opposed to this. So the process all along has just been between the presidency and the Minister of Information. We don't think that is right. We would like to see something that is different, from that. We want to see more dialogue between the regulatory bodies and media institutions on the best way to carry out, regulation, because they must understand that when you talk of the media, one of the reasons why we don't like this arbitrariness is that they forget that people have investments in these media organizations. Each broadcast medium has its audiences. So you can't just, deny the audience, the right to know. As we always explain, we will not have the media if citizens don't have the right to know. It is the basis for anything relating to freedom of expression or freedom of the media, the right of the citizens to know. There are people who may not have their breakfast if they've not listened to Arise or watch your morning show at ditto some other stations like that. So the public interest must guide all of us in how we manage the affairs of the media in the context of regulation.
Well, before we let you go, I wanted to talk about, when I was reading the report, the judge actually commended MRA for challenging NBC's action. Now, so from a media advocacy perspective, do you think that this ruling signifies for, more organizations and individuals coming out to advocate for media freedom and freedom of expression?
Anytime there's a breach of press freedom or violation of journalists' rights, our position has always been go to court to challenge it. But sometimes people come up with all kind of reasons. Well, we're having some dialogue, we're talking. Then the fair element, you don't know what would happen. You don't want your station to close down. Sometimes you want to go by way. So I feel that this case by the MRA should now embolden everybody to know that you have, a right. And it's not just Nigerian courts alone. You can go to ECOWAS courts. The other time when the former president banned Twitter, and NBC followed up and said all broadcast stations must, remove their Twitter handles. MRA, IPC, in fact, more or less a coalition of whistleblowers, many of us, coalition journalists, we all went to the ECOWAS court to challenge it, and we got favorable, ruling. So for me, this particular ruling, this commendation, should now serve as an encouragement to all of us that at least we are not totally, helpless. We can always seek the intervention of the courts when we believe that our rights have been assaulted.
All right, then. I think
well, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and hopefully Mr. Shibole appreciates you too.
And we appreciate each other as well.
All right.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Mr.
you very
Lanre
much.
Arogundade, Director, International Press Center. Thank you for your fight for press freedom, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.